Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Ocean. Tonight, we are leaving the vast, open emptiness of the deep blue to drift into a world that is closer to the shore, yet feels like an entirely different planet. We are entering the underwater cathedrals known as the kelp forests. These are not forests of wood and bark, but of liquid motion, golden towers that rise from the cold, rocky sea floor to kiss the sunlight at the surface. As we descend into this emerald realm, the first thing you notice is the light. It does not fall in a flat, even sheet as it does on land, but rather it dances. The sunlight is filtered through the thick amber canopy above, creating shifting shafts of illumination that sway back and forth with the rhythm of the waves, painting the sea floor in a hypnotic pattern of gold and shadow. It is a world of constant, gentle movement, where the trees themselves seem to breathe with the ocean, swaying in a synchronized trance that lulls everything within it to a slower, quieter pace of life. To understand this place, we must first look at the architect of the forest, the giant kelp, scientifically known as Macrocystis pyrifera. Despite looking like a tree, standing tall and leafy, the kelp is not a plant at all. It belongs to the kingdom Protista, making it a form of complex, multicellular algae. It has no true roots to drink water from the soil, no trunk made of wood to support its weight, and no vascular system to pump fluids against gravity. Instead, it absorbs everything it needs: sunlight, nutrients, and water, directly through every inch of its surface. It is a being of pure absorption, soaking up the ocean through its skin. Because it is supported entirely by the water around it, it does not need to be rigid. It is the ultimate example of strength through flexibility, a structure that survives the violence of the ocean not by fighting the waves, but by yielding to them, bending and flowing with the currents in a display of passive endurance that has allowed it to conquer the coastlines of the world. At the very base of this giant, anchoring it to the rocky reef, lies a structure that looks deceptively like a root ball, known as the holdfast. Unlike the roots of an oak or a pine, which dig deep into the earth to extract moisture, the holdfast serves only one purpose: to grip. It is a tangled mass of tough, spaghetti-like fingers, called haptera, that grow over and around the rocks, cementing the kelp to the seafloor with a glue-like biological cement. This grip is incredibly powerful, capable of withstanding the drag of a 60-foot tower being thrashed by winter storms. The holdfast does not bury itself in sand or mud. It requires a hard substrate, a solid foundation of stone. Inside this tangled knot, a miniature ecosystem thrives. Tiny crabs, worms, and brittle stars make their homes in the crevices between the haptera, protected from predators by the sheer density of the kelp's grip. It is the city foundation of the forest, a hidden world of life huddled beneath the towering stalks, holding on tight while the ocean pools above. Rising from the holdfast is the stipe, the kelp's equivalent of a trunk. But where a tree trunk is solid and unyielding, the stipe is a marvel of rope-like engineering. It is a bundle of flexible fibers, tough yet pliable, designed to act like a shock absorber. If the stipe were rigid, the constant push and pull of the tides would snap it in two within hours. Instead, it allows the kelp to dance. The stipe can stretch and twist, allowing the fronds to move with the surge without breaking. This flexibility is vital because the kelp forest exists in a high-energy environment. The water here is never truly still. It is always surging, pushing, and pulling. The stipe translates this chaotic energy into a graceful, swaying motion, turning the violent force of the waves into a gentle rocking that defines the atmosphere of the underwater woods. Along the length of the stipe grow the blades, the golden brown leaves of the kelp. These are the factories of the forest, wrinkled and textured to maximize their surface area. The wrinkles are not accidental. They create turbulence in the water flowing over the blade. In a smooth flow, a layer of stagnant water would form against the skin of the kelp, preventing it from absorbing nutrients. The ridges and valleys on the blade disrupt this layer, forcing fresh, nutrient-rich water to mix against the surface, ensuring the kelp is constantly fed. The color of these blades is a deep, translucent amber, a result of a pigment called fucoxanthin. While land plants use chlorophyll to absorb red and blue light, kelp uses this brown pigment to capture the blue-green light that penetrates best through the seawater. It is a solar panel tuned specifically for the underwater spectrum, turning the dim, filtered light of the ocean into the energy of life. At the base of each blade sits a small, gas-filled balloon called a pneumatocyst. These are the buoys that keep the forest standing. Without them, the heavy kelp fronds would simply collapse onto the seafloor, lying in a tangled heap in the dark. The pneumatocysts are filled with a mixture of gases, primarily oxygen, nitrogen, and oddly, carbon monoxide. This gas provides the lift necessary to hold the massive fronds upright, stretching them toward the sun. Each bulb is a perfect sphere or oval, engineered to resist the pressure of the water. As the kelp grows, it produces these floats at regular intervals, adding buoyancy as it gains weight. It is a gravity-defying strategy, building a skyscraper that is held up not by steel or stone, but by thousands of tiny pockets of captured air lifting the forest toward the sky. The speed at which this forest grows is one of the most astonishing facts in the natural world. Giant kelp is one of the fastest growing organisms on Earth, capable of growing up to 2 feet in a single day under ideal conditions. Imagine planting a garden and watching it rise visibly before your eyes. That is the reality of the kelp forest. This rapid growth is a race for survival. The kelp must reach the surface canopy, where the sunlight is strongest, before it is shaded out by its neighbors or eaten by grazers. This explosive energy means that a kelp forest can regenerate completely after a storm in just a few seasons. It is a forest of constant renewal, a place where life rushes upward in a silent green sprint, turning sunlight and cold water into biomass at a rate that rivals the most productive rainforests on land. When the kelp fronds finally reach the surface, they do not stop growing. Instead, they spread out horizontally, forming a dense, floating mat known as the canopy. This canopy is the roof of the forest, a thick golden carpet that lies on top of the ocean. From above, it looks like a slick of oil or a tangled island of vegetation. This surface mat serves a crucial function. It calms the water. The friction of the dense kelp dampens the waves, smoothing out the chop and creating a zone of calm water beneath the forest. Inside the kelp bed, the ocean is significantly quieter and stiller than in the open sea just a few yards away. This creates a sanctuary for marine life, a sheltered harbor built by the algae itself, where fish can rest and larvae can settle without being swept away by the current. Beneath this floating roof, the light quality changes dramatically, creating what divers often call the cathedral effect. The thick canopy blocks much of the direct sunlight, casting the forest floor in a perpetual, moody twilight. The light that does get through is filtered, turning the water a glowing chartreuse or deep emerald. Beams of light punch through gaps in the canopy, illuminating swirling particles of dust and plankton like motes in a sunbeam. This interplay of shadow and light creates a visual depth and mystery, hiding predators and prey alike in the gloom. It is a place of secrets, where visual ranges are limited and creatures must rely on stealth and camouflage to survive in the dim, golden haze. The kelp forest is entirely dependent on the temperature of the water, thriving only in the cold. You will not find these forests in the warm, tropical waters of the equator. Giant kelp requires cool, nutrient-rich water, typically between 42 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. This is because cold water holds more dissolved gases, like nitrogen and carbon dioxide, which the kelp needs to build its body. The cold water is often delivered by a process called upwelling, where deep, nutrient-heavy currents rise from the abyss to strike the continental shelf, fertilizing the coast. If the water gets too warm, the kelp begins to deteriorate. Its tissues soften, and it eventually dissolves. The forest is a child of the chill, a lush expression of the cold ocean's fertility. Drifting through this canopy is the forest's most iconic guardian, the sea otter. These furry mammals are not just residents. They are the caretakers of the kelp. When sea otters sleep, they perform a behavior that is both adorable and practical. They wrap themselves in the kelp. An otter will float on its back and roll itself into a frond of surface kelp, using it like a blanket or an anchor. This prevents the sleeping otter from drifting out to sea with the tide. A mother otter will even wrap her pup in kelp while she dives for food, leaving the baby safely tethered in a cradle of algae. This intimate connection between the mammal and the algae highlights the kelp's role as a physical home, a safety net that holds the inhabitants in place against the vastness of the Pacific. The fur of the sea otter is a marvel of insulation, necessary for survival in the kelp forest's freezing waters. Unlike whales or seals, otters have no blubber to keep them warm. Instead, they rely on the densest fur in the animal kingdom, with up to 1 million hairs per square inch. This fur is so thick that water never actually touches the otter's skin. It is trapped by a layer of air held within the underfur. This air layer acts as a dry suit, keeping the otter warm and buoyant. To maintain this, otters spend hours every day grooming, blowing air into their fur and spreading natural oils to keep it waterproof. In the quiet of the kelp forest, you can often hear the soft puffing and splashing of an otter meticulously tending to its coat, a never-ending ritual of warmth in a cold world. However, the kelp forest is locked in an eternal, slow-motion war with a spiny enemy, the purple sea urchin. These small, spherical creatures are voracious grazers that feed on the holdfasts of the kelp. Ideally, they eat the drift kelp, pieces that fall to the floor. But if their population grows too large, they march in armies across the reef, chewing through the anchors of the living forest. When they sever the holdfast, the entire kelp tower floats away and dies. This can lead to the formation of an urchin barren, an underwater desert where the forest has been clear-cut, leaving only rock and a carpet of starving urchins. The urchins can enter a zombie-like state where they can survive for years with almost no food, waiting for the kelp to return, only to eat it immediately. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of this ecosystem, where a simple imbalance can turn a lush cathedral into a wasteland. This is where the sea otter returns to the story as a keystone species. Otters are the primary predators of sea urchins. They dive down, snatch the urchins from the rocks, and crack them open on their chests using stones as tools. By eating the urchins, the otters keep the population in check, allowing the kelp to grow. Where otters are present, kelp forests are thick and healthy. Where otters are absent, the forests often vanish. The health of the entire three-dimensional underwater city depends on the appetite of this one furry predator. It is a delicate trophic cascade, a biological domino effect where the removal of one piece causes the entire structure to collapse. Adding a flash of color to the amber and green palette of the forest is the Garibaldi, the state marine fish of California. These bright, neon orange fish are the gardeners of the reef. The male Garibaldi clears a patch of rock to grow a specific type of red algae, which serves as a nest for the female's eggs. He is obsessively tidy, removing all other types of algae, debris, and even invading sea stars from his garden. If a diver approaches, the Garibaldi will fearlessly charge, thumping against the intruder's mask to defend his patch. In the sleepy sway of the kelp, the Garibaldi is a spark of fiery energy, a diligent farmer cultivating his own tiny plot of land amidst the towering giants. Hovering motionless in the water column, often vertically or upside down, is the blue rockfish. These fish are masters of suspension. They hang in the gaps between the kelp fronds, drifting with the surge, conserving every ounce of energy. They look less like active swimmers and more like suspended ornaments. They feed on the tiny plankton drifting through the forest, snapping them up with a subtle extension of the jaw. To a diver moving through the forest, the rockfish appear as silent sentinels, watching from the shadows, their bodies perfectly adapted to the dim light and the vertical architecture of the kelp. They embody the patience of the forest, waiting for the ocean to bring the food to them. To survive the constant rubbing and friction of the waves, the kelp produces a slippery coating known as mucilage, or simply kelp slime. If you touch a kelp frond, it feels slick and slimy. This is not decay, it is a lubricant. The slime reduces the friction between the blades as they rub against each other in the swell, preventing them from tearing. It also makes it difficult for parasites and epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants, to attach to the blades and weigh them down. This mucus is sloughed off constantly into the water, adding dissolved organic carbon to the soup of the ocean, feeding bacteria and microscopic life. The kelp is essentially sweating sugar and protein, greasing its own movements while feeding the water around it. The life cycle of the giant kelp involves a hidden, microscopic generation that looks nothing like the massive towers we see. The large kelp plant is the sporophyte, and it releases trillions of microscopic spores from specialized blades near the base called sporophylls. These spores swim through the water and settle on the rock, growing into microscopic male and female gametophytes. These tiny, invisible plants live on the seafloor, looking like mere fuzz. It is here, in the microscopic world, that fertilization happens. If the conditions are right, the tiny female produces an egg, the male finds it, and a new giant begins to grow. This alternation of generations means that for every visible kelp forest, there is an invisible, microscopic forest living on the rocks below, waiting for its chance to rise. The kelp forest is also a massive carbon sink, playing a crucial role in the health of the planet's atmosphere. As the kelp grows with such incredible speed, it sucks enormous amounts of carbon dioxide from the water. Because it is biomass, it stores this carbon in its tissues. When the kelp dies or is ripped loose by a storm, much of it sinks into the deep ocean trenches. Once it falls below a certain depth, the carbon is locked away for centuries, unable to return to the atmosphere. This blue carbon sequestration is one of the most efficient natural ways of scrubbing the sky. The swaying forest is not just a home for fish. It is a planetary lung, breathing in the heat of the world and burying it in the cold dark of the deep. Finally, we must consider the journey of drift kelp. Not all kelp stays in the forest. Storms rip massive bundles of it free, sending them drifting out into the open ocean or sinking them into the deep sea. These wandering rafts of kelp become life rafts for coastal creatures, carrying them hundreds of miles to new territories. But even more importantly, the sinking kelp provides food for the abyssal plains. Deep-sea submersibles often find fresh green kelp lying on the bottom of the ocean, thousands of feet down. In a world of total darkness where no plants can grow, this falling manna from above provides a feast for sea cucumbers, urchins, and deep-sea crabs. The kelp forest feeds the ocean far beyond its own borders, sending its golden leaves on a final, downward journey to nourish the darkest corners of the earth. Beneath the towering canopy of the giant kelp, there exists a second, darker forest that lives in the permanent shadow of the giants above. This is the understory, a dense thicket of smaller, stiffer algae like the Pterygophora and Laminaria that grow only a few feet tall. While the giant kelp reaches for the surface with frantic speed, these understory species are the tortoises of the reef, investing their energy in building thick, woody stipes that are tough enough to stand upright against the surge without the aid of gas bladders. They form a waist-high jungle of dark, leathery fronds that sweep back and forth across the rocky floor, creating a complex labyrinth of cover for creatures that are too small or too shy to venture into the open water. In this dim, amber-filtered twilight, the water movement is dampened even further, creating a micro-habitat where the current is slow and the silence is profound. A sheltered nursery where juvenile fish can rest among the swaying trunks of this miniature submerged woodland. Among the most resilient residents of this lower forest is the stalked kelp, Pterygophora californica, a species that mimics the biology of terrestrial trees in a way that giant kelp does not. While the giant kelp is ephemeral, often ripped away by storms or dying back after a few years, the stalked kelp is a perennial survivor that can live for decades. Its stipe is stiff and fibrous, and incredibly, it records the passage of time. If you were to slice through the trunk of a stalked kelp, you would find concentric growth rings, exactly like the rings of an oak or a pine tree. These rings tell the history of the ocean's seasons, with wide, light-colored rings indicating years of rapid growth during nutrient-rich upwelling events, and narrow, dark rings marking years of warm water and starvation like El Niño. It is a biological history book rooted to the reef, keeping a silent, woody record of the climate within its own body while the ocean swirls around it. Clinging to the rocks beneath these ancient stalks is the red abalone, a mollusk that carries a fortress on its back. The shell of the abalone is a masterpiece of biomineralization, a rough, brick-red dome often covered in algae and barnacles, making it look indistinguishable from the stone itself. But the true wonder lies inside. The inner surface of the shell is lined with nacre, or mother of pearl, a material made of microscopic tiles of calcium carbonate, stacked like bricks and glued together with a protein mortar. This structure is incredibly tough, able to absorb the shock of tumbling boulders or the bite of a predator without shattering. The iridescence of the nacre, the swirling pearly colors of pink, green, and silver, is not caused by pigment, but by the physical structure of the tiles refracting light. It is a hidden beauty, a secret cathedral of color that the animal keeps facing its own soft body, shielding itself with a wall of rainbows. To feed, the abalone employs a tongue that is terrifying in its efficiency, known as a radula. This ribbon-like organ is covered in thousands of microscopic teeth made of chitin and hardened with minerals, acting like a biological conveyor belt or a rasp. As the abalone creeps slowly across the reef, the radula extends and scrapes against the rock, rasping away the layer of algae and kelp spores with a rhythmic, grinding motion. The sound of this feeding is a low, rhythmic rasping that can sometimes be heard by divers, a vibration of stone on stone. The teeth are so hard that they can etch the rock itself, leaving behind faint tracks that mark the slow, grazing path of the snail. When the teeth wear down from this constant grinding, they are simply shed and replaced by new rows marching forward from the back of the throat, ensuring the abalone never loses its ability to carve its dinner from the stone. Hiding in the crevices of the reef is the horn shark, a small, sluggish shark that looks like a relic from a prehistoric era. Unlike the sleek, torpedo-shaped sharks of the open ocean that must swim constantly to breathe, the horn shark is a bottom dweller with a broad, blunt head and strong, muscular pectoral fins that it uses to crawl over the rocks. It spends its days sleeping in caves, wedged tightly into the dark to avoid the sway of the surge. Its most distinctive features are the two sharp, venomous spines located in front of its dorsal fins. These spines are defensive weapons, designed to deter large predators like angel sharks or sea bass from swallowing the horn shark whole. If a predator bites down, the spines pierce the roof of the mouth, delivering a painful warning that usually results in the shark being spat out. It is a creature built for defense, an armored tank that trundles through the kelp forest floor with a slow, deliberate confidence. The egg case of the horn shark is an architectural marvel designed to survive the violent energy of the shallow coast. Instead of laying round, vulnerable eggs, the mother horn shark produces a leather-like capsule that is shaped like a corkscrew or a spiral drill bit. When she lays the egg, she uses her mouth to pick it up and physically screw it into a deep crevice or a hole in the reef. The spiral flanges on the egg case act like the threads of a bolt, wedging it so tightly into the rock that even the strongest winter waves cannot dislodge it. This ensures that the developing embryo remains safe and stationary for the months it takes to hatch, protected by a casing that is tough enough to resist crabs and urchins. It is a perfect example of engineering meeting biology, a screw-top cradle for the next generation. Another master of defense in the kelp forest is the swell shark, a creature that has turned the ability to bloat into a superpower. At first glance, the swell shark looks like a typical spotted bottom feeder, blending in with the dappled light of the forest floor. But if threatened by a predator or pulled from its hiding spot, the shark undergoes a dramatic transformation. It arches its body into a U-shape, grabs its own tail in its mouth, and begins to gulp down massive amounts of water. Its stomach is incredibly elastic, allowing the shark to inflate to twice its normal size. If it is inside a rocky crevice, this inflation wedges it in so tightly that it is physically impossible to pull out. If it is in the open, the sudden increase in size makes it too large for many predators to swallow. It becomes a rigid, water-filled balloon, staring back at its attacker with large, cat-like eyes, waiting for the danger to pass before exhaling the water and returning to its normal, slender shape. Recent discoveries have revealed that the swell shark has a secret message written on its skin, invisible to humans but screamingly bright to other sharks. Under the blue, ambient light of the ocean, the skin of the swell shark is biofluorescent, absorbing the blue light and re-emitting it as a glowing neon green. To our eyes, the shark is brown and spotted, but to another shark, which possesses yellow filters in its eyes to block out the background blue, the swell shark glows like a radioactive lantern in the dark crevices of the reef. This hidden light show allows the sharks to see each other in the gloom, recognizing potential mates or rivals without alerting predators that lack the specific vision to see the green glow. It is a private channel of communication, a coded signal broadcast in neon ink across the skin of a fish hiding in the shadows. Gliding through the corridors of the kelp forest with the grace of a stealth bomber is the bat ray. These majestic relatives of sharks have abandoned the side-to-side swimming motion of fish in favor of underwater flight. Their pectoral fins have evolved into massive, wing-like structures that flap with a slow, rhythmic beat. The bat ray is an excavator of the seafloor. It feeds on buried clams, worms, and crabs hiding in the sand. To reach them, the ray hovers over the bottom and rapidly pumps its wings, creating a powerful jet of water that blasts the sand away. It creates a depression or a pit, exposing the prey. Once the shell is revealed, the ray uses its mouth, which is located on the underside of its head, to crush the prey. Its teeth are not sharp points, but fused plates that look like rolling pins or cobblestones, designed to shatter clamshells with thousands of pounds of pressure. The sound of a bat ray feeding is a series of loud cracks and crunches that echoes through the water, the sound of geology meeting biology. The camouflage of the decorator crab takes the concept of blending into an obsessive, artistic level. This crab does not simply rely on the color of its shell to hide. It actively builds a disguise. The shell of the decorator crab is covered in thousands of tiny, hook-like bristles called setae, which act exactly like the hook side of Velcro. The crab picks up pieces of its environment, tufts of algae, small sponges, hydroids, and even stinging anemones, and sticks them onto its back. It does not do this randomly. It selects materials that match the specific patch of reef it is living on. If it moves to a red algae zone, it will remove the green algae from its shell and replace it with red. The organisms it attaches often stay alive, growing on the crab's back and turning the animal into a walking garden. When the crab molts and sheds its shell, it will meticulously remove the decorations from the old shell and transplant them onto the new one, refusing to lose the camouflage it has worked so hard to cultivate. Cruising the mid-water with a look of permanent grumpy authority is the California sheephead, a wrasse that undergoes one of the most dramatic life changes in the ocean. All sheephead are born female. They are small, pinkish-red fish that blend in with the lower light levels. But as they age and grow larger, a dominant female will undergo a hormonal cascade that transforms her into a male. This change is total. Her ovaries dissolve and are replaced by testes. Her color shifts to a striking pattern with a black head and tail and a red midsection, and she develops a large, bulbous hump on her forehead. The newly formed male also grows massive, canine-like, teeth that jut out from his jaw. These teeth are not for fighting, but for crunching. The sheephead is a critical predator of sea urchins, using its powerful jaws to smash through the urchin's test and eat the meat inside. In this way, the sheephead acts as a backup guardian of the kelp, stepping in to control the grazers when the sea otters are absent. Encrusting the blades of the kelp is a microscopic city known as the membranipora, or kelp lace. To the naked eye, this looks like a white, crusty frost spreading over the amber surface of the kelp frond. But under a magnifying glass, this crust reveals itself to be a colony of thousands of tiny animals called bryozoans. Each individual, or zooid, lives in a tiny, rectangular box made of calcium carbonate. They are interconnected, sharing nutrients and nervous signals. From each box, a tiny ring of tentacles emerges to filter plankton from the water. While they are beautiful in their complexity, these colonies can be a burden to the kelp. A heavy infestation of bryozoans can block the sunlight from reaching the kelp's photosynthetic cells and add significant weight to the blade. If the colony becomes too thick, the blade may become brittle and break off, sinking to the bottom. It is a delicate balance between a harmless passenger and a suffocating guest, played out on the surface of a single leaf. The Norris's top snail is a creature that lives its life on a vertical commute. This small, turban-shaped snail lives on the stipes of the giant kelp. Every day, it engages in a slow-motion migration. As the sun rises, the snail climbs down the kelp toward the darker, cooler water near the bottom to avoid the heat and the visual predators of the surface. As the sun sets, it turns around and climbs back up toward the canopy to graze on the tender, fresh growth at the tip of the kelp. If the snail is dislodged, perhaps knocked off by a fish or a swaying frond, it falls to the forest floor. But it does not stay there. It immediately seeks out the nearest kelp holdfast and begins the long, arduous climb back up the tower. Its entire existence is a game of snakes and ladders, a relentless drive to reach the high, swaying branches of its vertical world. The physics of the kelp forest creates a phenomenon known as kelp dampening, which fundamentally alters the energy of the coastline. As ocean swells travel through the open water, they carry immense energy. When these waves hit the kelp forest, they are forced to drag through the millions of blades and stipes. The friction is enormous. The viscous drag of the kelp saps the energy from the wave, smoothing out the chop and reducing the height of the swell. Inside the forest, the water becomes glassy and calm, even when the ocean outside is rough. This dampening effect protects the coastline from erosion, preventing the waves from hammering the cliffs with full force. The forest acts as a biological breakwater, a soft, yielding wall that absorbs the anger of the ocean and turns it into a gentle, rhythmic sway. Hiding in the tangled knots of the kelp holdfasts are the kelp curlers, small isopods that look like pillbugs. These creatures are the herbivores of the canopy, but they have a unique way of eating. They grip the edge of a kelp blade and roll it up into a tube, using a sticky secretion to glue the edges together. They then live inside this tube, safe from predators, eating the kelp from the inside out. As they consume their home, they simply roll up more of the blade. A single kelp frond can be riddled with these curled tubes, each one housing a tiny grazing crustacean. They are the leaf rollers of the sea, architects who build their houses out of their own food source, turning the flat, solar-collecting blades into cylindrical bunkers. The leopard shark is a frequent visitor to the shallow sandy patches between the kelp reefs, a shark that defies the stereotype of the solitary hunter. Leopard sharks are highly social and are often found resting in large schools, sometimes numbering in the dozens or hundreds. They are beautifully marked with dark saddles and spots that resemble their feline namesake, breaking up their outline against the dappled sand. Unlike many sharks that must swim to force water over their gills, the leopard shark is capable of buccal pumping. It has powerful cheek muscles that actively suck water into its mouth and push it over the gills, allowing the shark to lie perfectly still on the bottom. This ability to rest allows them to conserve energy in the calm, protected bays of the kelp forest, forming pile-ups of sleeping sharks that look like a drift of patterned logs. The California scorpionfish is the master of the invisible strike. It is a bottom-dwelling fish with mottled red and brown skin that looks exactly like a rock covered in coralline algae. It does not swim, it sits. It can remain motionless for hours, indistinguishable from the reef. But hidden in its dorsal, anal, and pelvic fins are sharp spines loaded with potent venom. This venom is a defense against predation, causing excruciating pain to anything that tries to eat it, or any human unlucky enough to step on it. When a small fish or crustacean wanders too close to the scorpionfish's mouth, the fish opens its jaws with explosive speed. This creates a massive suction vacuum that pulls the prey and the surrounding water into the mouth in milliseconds. It happens so fast that the human eye cannot track it. One moment the prey is there, and the next, there is only a puff of sand and a motionless rockfish. Drifting like a flamboyant ribbon through the water column is the Spanish shawl nudibranch, a sea slug that displays a blazing warning to the world. Its body is a deep electric purple, and its back is covered in bright orange protrusions called serrata. This neon coloration is aposematic, a signal to predators that the slug is toxic and not to be eaten. But the Spanish shawl does not produce its own poison. It steals it. It feeds on hydroids, tiny relatives of jellyfish that possess stinging cells called nematocysts. When the nudibranch eats the hydroid, it digests the body but manages to keep the stinging cells intact. It moves these stolen weapons through its digestive tract and stores them in the tips of its orange serrata. If a fish bites the nudibranch, the stinging cells fire, delivering a mouthful of pain that belongs to a completely different animal. It is a beautiful thief, arming itself with the stolen artillery of its prey. The hydrodynamics of a single kelp blade are a study in the struggle for nutrients. In moving water, a thin layer of stagnant fluid, called the boundary layer, forms right against the surface of the blade. The nutrients in the water must diffuse through this stagnant layer to reach the kelp's cells. If the water flow is too smooth, this layer gets thick and the kelp starves. The jagged, corrugated edges of the giant kelp blade act as turbulence generators. They trip the water flow, causing it to swirl and eddy. These mini vortices scour away the stagnant boundary layer, bringing fresh, nutrient-rich water directly into contact with the blade's surface. The kelp has evolved a shape that deliberately makes the water messy, because in the chaos of turbulence lies the fuel for growth. The gray whale, on its epic migration from the Arctic to Mexico, often uses the kelp forest as a strategic sanctuary. When mothers are traveling with their newborn calves, they hug the coastline, swimming just beyond the surf zone. The dense kelp beds offer two forms of protection. First, they provide visual cover, hiding the calf from the view of killer whales that patrol the deeper waters. Second, the kelp interferes with the echolocation of the orcas. The millions of gas-filled nematocysts in the kelp forest scatter sound waves, creating an acoustic fog that confuses the predator's sonar. A grey whale mother will often steer her calf directly into the thickest part of the kelp bed if she senses danger, using the forest as a soundproof curtain to mask their passage. The chemical signature of the kelp forest is a scent that travels into the atmosphere, linking the ocean to the sky. When kelp decomposes or is grazed upon by urchins and snails, it releases a chemical compound called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS. This gas has a pungent, sulfuric smell, the smell of the sea that we recognize at the beach. But to a seabird, like a tube-nosed albatross or a shearwater, this smell is a dinner bell. These birds have incredibly sensitive noses and can detect DMS from miles away. They follow the scent trail upwind because they know that where there is the smell of grazing kelp, there are grazers, and where there are grazers, there are clouds of krill and small fish. The kelp forest effectively broadcasts its location to the air, inviting the birds to come and feed on the ecosystem it supports. The acoustic environment of the kelp forest is defined not by silence, but by a constant crackling static. This sound, which resembles the sizzling of frying bacon or the crackle of a Geiger counter, is produced by millions of snapping shrimp hiding in the holdfasts and crevices. These tiny shrimp possess one oversized claw that they can snap shut with incredible speed. The snap creates a cavitation bubble, a vacuum in the water that collapses with a loud pop and a flash of heat. This sound is so pervasive that it dominates the underwater soundscape of the kelp forest. To a larval fish drifting in the open ocean, this crackling noise is a beacon. They can hear the reef from miles away and swim toward the sound, knowing that the noise of the shrimp means the safety and food of the kelp forest. It is the static buzz of a thriving city, a sonic lighthouse guiding the next generation home. Floating alongside the perennial giant kelp is its annual cousin, the bull kelp, or Nereocystis luetkeana, a plant that lives a life of desperate, high-speed urgency. While giant kelp can live for several years, the bull kelp has only one season to complete its entire life cycle. It begins in the spring as a microscopic spore and must race toward the surface, growing up to 60 feet in a single summer. Unlike the giant kelp, which has many small floats along its length, the bull kelp puts all its energy into one massive spherical float at the very top of a single whip-like stipe. This bulb, often called a mermaid's bladder, can be the size of a grapefruit or larger, and it is filled with a mixture of gases, including carbon monoxide. From the top of this single float, a mop of dozens of long golden blades streams out across the water. Because it has only one anchor line, the bull kelp is incredibly flexible and thrives in the roughest, most turbulent waters where the giant kelp might break. It survives the crashing waves by bending flat against the surface, acting like a flexible whip that rides the energy of the storm rather than resisting it, only to be ripped away by the first heavy winter gales, leaving the reef bare to start the cycle again the next spring. Navigating the shadows of this underwater forest with a distinct lack of fear is the Pacific electric ray, Torpedo californica. This predator does not rely on speed or sharp teeth, but on a weapon of pure energy hidden within its own flesh. On either side of its head, occupying a large portion of its disc-like body, are kidney-shaped organs derived from modified muscle tissue. These organs act as biological batteries, composed of stacks of cells called electrocytes. When the ray is threatened or hunting, it can discharge these batteries simultaneously, delivering a shock of up to 45 volts. While this voltage might sound low compared to a wall socket, the amperage is high enough to knock a grown human unconscious or stop the heart of a large fish instantly. The ray drifts through the kelp forest at night, hovering silently in the water column. It is an aggressive sleeper, often burying itself in the sand during the day, but at night, it will actively chase prey, wrapping its pectoral fins around a fish to deliver a contact shock that stuns the victim before it can even twitch, allowing the ray to swallow it whole in the darkness. Scuttling across the forest floor with a speed that defies the reputation of its kind is the sunflower star, Pycnopodia helianthoides. This is the giant of the starfish world, growing up to a meter across and possessing as many as 24 distinct arms. Unlike the rigid, slow-moving stars of the tide pools, the sunflower star has a soft, fleshy skin that is held up by water pressure rather than a hard, calcified skeleton. This hydrostatic skeleton allows it to flow over obstacles like a living liquid. It is a terrifying predator to the slower creatures of the reef. It moves on roughly 15,000 tiny tube feet, cruising at speeds that, for a starfish, are comparable to a sprint. When it touches a sea urchin or a snail, the prey often reacts with a violent escape response, twisting and fleeing in panic. The sunflower star can engulf prey whole, pushing its stomach out of its mouth to digest urchins, clams, and even other starfish, leaving behind only clean, white shells as it marches relentlessly across the seabed. The cleaning stations of the kelp forest are bustling hubs of commerce and hygiene, presided over by the senorita fish. These small, cigar-shaped fish with a flash of yellow are the dermatologists of the reef. They hover in specific locations, often near a prominent rock or kelp frond, and advertise their services by swimming in a distinct, fluttering pattern. Large fish, such as kelp bass, Garibaldi, and even the massive giant sea bass, recognize this signal and approach the station. The larger fish will stop swimming, hover in place, and often change color or flare their gills to indicate they are ready to be cleaned. The senorita fish then swarm over the client, picking off parasitic crustaceans, copepods, and dead skin. They will even swim inside the mouths and gill cavities of predators that could swallow them in a second, protected by an ancient truce that values cleanliness over hunger. At night, the señorita performs a vanishing act. It dives headfirst into the sand, burying itself completely to sleep safe from predators, disappearing from the reef until the morning sun returns. Lurking in the shadows of the kelp fronds with a pattern that perfectly mimics the dappled light is the kelp bass, or calico bass. This fish is a master of the ambush, designed specifically for the visual chaos of the forest. Its body is covered in a checkerboard pattern of brown, white, and olive green blotches. When the fish hangs motionless in the water, these spots blend seamlessly with the shifting shadows cast by the swaying canopy above. It is a disruption camouflage that breaks up the outline of the fish, making it invisible to the small baitfish it hunts. The kelp bass is a patient hunter, often hovering vertically among the stipes, waiting for a school of blacksmith or anchovies to drift too close. When the moment is right, it strikes with a rapid suction-feeding lunge, inhaling the prey before fading back into the visual noise of the kelp. Crawling slowly along the bottom, resembling a discarded blob of algae, is the California sea hare, Aplysia californica. This giant sea slug can grow to be the size of a football and weigh up to 15 pounds. It grazes on red algae, which gives its skin a reddish-purple tint. The sea hare gets its name from the two large, ear-like sensory structures on its head, called rhinophores, which resemble the ears of a rabbit. These structures detect chemicals in the water, allowing the slug to smell its way to the next meal. When threatened, the sea hare releases a cloud of bright purple ink and a milky white substance called opaline. The ink creates a visual smokescreen, but the opaline is a chemical weapon that attacks the senses of the predator. It contains amino acids that mimic the smell of food, confusing spiny lobsters and crabs, effectively causing their sensory antennae to become overloaded and stuffed, giving the sluggish sea hare time to glide away on its single muscular foot. The neuroscience of the sea hare has famously illuminated the workings of the human mind. Because the sea hare has a relatively simple nervous system with massive neurons, some large enough to be seen with the naked eye, it has been the subject of decades of memory research. Scientists discovered that these slugs could learn simple tasks and form memories, allowing researchers to map the exact chemical changes that happen in a brain cell when a memory is created. The slug drifting through the kelp forest carries within its simple brain the same fundamental molecular machinery that allows us to remember our childhoods or learn a new language. It is a humble, slimy Nobel Prize winner, grazing quietly in the shadows while holding the secrets of consciousness in its giant nerve cells. The climatic phenomenon known as El Niño is the greatest natural enemy of the kelp forest. When the trade winds weaken and warm tropical water sloshes back across the Pacific to the California coast, the nutrient-rich upwelling that feeds the forest is shut off. The water temperature rises and the nitrogen levels plummet. For the giant kelp, this is catastrophic. The kelp begins to starve. Its tissues weaken, the fronds turn ragged and pale, and the holdfasts lose their grip on the rock. Winter storms that accompany El Niño often rip these weakened forests apart, tearing out the canopy and piling it in massive, rotting heaps on the beaches. The underwater cathedral can be reduced to a barren plain of stubble in a single season. However, hidden in the sediment are millions of microscopic spores, the dormant seed bank of the forest, waiting for the cold water to return so they can trigger the next explosive regeneration. Within the cell walls of the kelp lies a substance that connects the underwater forest to our daily lives: algin. This complex carbohydrate is what gives the kelp its flexibility and its slippery texture. It acts as a structural gel, allowing the plant to bend without breaking and holding water within its cells to prevent dehydration during low tides. Humans harvest kelp primarily to extract this algin. It is a powerful thickening and emulsifying agent. You have likely eaten the forest without knowing it. Algin is used to make ice cream smooth, to keep the foam in your beer from collapsing, and to give toothpaste its gel-like consistency. It is even used in dentistry to make molds of teeth and in textile printing. The very molecule that allows the kelp to dance in the waves is the same one that keeps the texture of modern civilization smooth and consistent. The kelp crab, Pugetia producta, is a resident of the canopy that has evolved a shape to match its home. Its carapace is shaped like a shield, smooth and olive green or brown, perfectly matching the color and texture of a kelp blade. Unlike the decorator crab that glues things to itself, the kelp crab relies on being smooth and flat to hide. It is a herbivore, but a destructive one. In the winter, when the kelp growth slows down, the kelp crab eats the kelp itself, chewing on the blades and stipes. If the population of crabs is high, they can cause significant damage to the forest, chewing through the structural fibers and causing fronds to break off. They are the goats of the canopy, grazing on the roof of the world, holding on tight with hooked legs against the thrashing of the surface waves. The grey whale's connection to the kelp forest goes beyond mere shelter. It is also a diner. During their migration, grey whales have been observed engaging in a behavior called kelp shopping. They will swim into the dense beds and roll in the canopy, sometimes emerging with strands of kelp draped over their backs. While they do not eat the kelp itself, the forest is teeming with mysid shrimp, tiny, swarm-forming crustaceans that hover in thick clouds around the kelp fronds. A grey whale can suck these swarms directly out of the water, filtering them through its coarse baleen. By targeting the kelp beds, the whale accesses a high-density snack bar on its long journey, supplementing its reserves with the protein hiding in the amber leaves. The microscopic nightlife of the kelp forest is illuminated by bioluminescent plankton, specifically dinoflagellates. These single-celled organisms drift by the billions through the fronds. They possess a chemical defense mechanism that is triggered by physical disturbance. When a fish swims through a cloud of dinoflagellates, or when a wave crashes through the canopy, the plankton flash a bright blue light. On a dark, moonless night, the kelp forest transforms into a galaxy of sparkling stars. The outline of a swimming seal or a hunting shark is traced in cold fire. This light serves to startle predators or to attract larger predators that might eat the attacker. A burglar alarm that turns the mechanical energy of a swim stroke into a chemical flash of brilliance. The kelp highway hypothesis suggests that the kelp forests of the Pacific Rim may have facilitated the peopling of the Americas. Anthropologists propose that early humans, traveling by boat from Northeast Asia, followed the continuous belt of kelp forests that stretches from Japan across the Bering Sea and down the coast of North and South America. This highway would have provided a calm, protected channel of water behind the kelp beds, shielded from the rough open ocean. More importantly, it provided a consistent, abundant food source. The same shellfish, urchins, fish, and otters are found throughout this entire rim. An ancient mariner could have traveled thousands of miles without ever needing to learn a new hunting technique or identify a new food source, riding the kelp road all the way to the New World. Hovering in schools that look like suspended silver needles are the tube snouts, Aulorhynchus flavidus. These strange relatives of the seahorse have elongated, stick-like bodies and long, tubular mouths. They congregate in the quiet water just above the kelp canopy or in the seagrass beds nearby. They are almost invisible until they move, blending in with the thin stipes of the understory. During the breeding season, The male tube snout builds a nest by binding pieces of algae together with a sticky thread secreted from his kidneys. He then guards the nest fiercely, using his long snout to snap at intruders. They feed on tiny plankton, sucking them up with a pipette-like action, living as a cloud of silver splinters that drift in unison with the current. The opal eye fish is a common resident of the reef with a distinct white spot on its back and bright blue eyes, but its diet presents a biological challenge. The opal eye is largely a vegetarian, grazing on the algae and sea lettuce that grow on the rocks. Most fish cannot digest plant matter efficiently because they lack the enzymes to break down cellulose. To solve this, the opal eye relies on a gut fermentation system similar to a cow. Its digestive tract is exceptionally long and houses a specific community of symbiotic microbes that ferment the algae, breaking down the tough cell walls to release the nutrients. Because baby opali are born without these microbes, they must acquire them. They do this by living in tide pools and potentially consuming the waste of older fish, inoculating their own guts with the necessary bacteria to survive a life of salad eating in the sea. The return of the giant sea bass, Stereolepis gigas, is one of the great conservation success stories of the kelp forest. These are true leviathans of the reef, capable of growing to 7 feet long and weighing over 500 pounds. They are bulky, slow-moving fish with dark spots, often described as looking like floating Volkswagen Beetles. For decades, they were hunted to the brink of extinction because they are curious and unafraid of divers. Now protected, they have returned to the forests of California. When a giant sea bass feeds, it opens a mouth the size of a bucket, creating a booming sound, a low-frequency thud caused by the sudden expansion of its jaws and the vacuum it creates. This sound can be felt in the chest of a diver from yards away, a percussive signal that the king of the forest is eating. Encased in the shadows of the rocky reef are the colorful crusts of sponges, primitive animals that act as the kidneys of the forest. Sponges come in vivid shades of cobalt blue, sulfur yellow, and burnt orange. They are stationary filter feeders, pumping massive volumes of water through their porous bodies to strain out bacteria and dissolved organic matter. A sponge the size of a gallon milk jug can pump hundreds of gallons of water a day. This constant filtration cleanses the water, improving clarity and allowing sunlight to penetrate deeper into the forest, which in turn helps the kelp grow. The sponges also produce chemical toxins to prevent other animals from growing over them, engaging in a silent, chemical warfare for space on the crowded rocks. Covering the rocks in carpets of brilliant pink and red is the strawberry anemone, Corinactis californica. These are not single individuals, but clones. A strawberry anemone reproduces by splitting in half, creating a genetically identical copy of itself. Over time, a single anemone can form a colony that covers square yards of rock face. When two different colonies meet, a slow-motion war begins. The anemones on the border develop special fighter tentacles called acrohaji, which are white and packed with potent stinging cells. They use these tentacles to sting and kill the invaders from the neighboring colony, creating a no man's land of bare rock between the two warring factions. It is a territorial battle fought by flower-like animals, silent and deadly, deciding the boundaries of the reef one sting at a time. Hiding in the deepest, darkest crevices of the reef is the California moray eel, Gymnothorax mordax. This serpent-like predator has no pectoral fins and no scales. Its skin is covered in a thick, protective mucus that is yellow, which mixes with its dark skin to make it look green. The moray opens and closes its mouth constantly, not to threaten, but to breathe, forcing water over its gills. Its most terrifying adaptation is its second set of jaws. Deep within its throat are pharyngeal jaws, a secondary set of toothed bones. When the moray bites a prey item with its main jaws, the pharyngeal jaws shoot forward, grab the prey, and pull it down into the throat. This alien-like mechanism allows the moray to swallow large fish while trapped in a narrow hole where it cannot generate suction. It is a biological horror mechanism perfect for hunting in tight spaces. The acoustic signature of the kelp forest surface is distinct from the crackling shrimp below. It is the sound of the kelp slap. When the wind picks up or a swell rolls through, the heavy, wet fronds of the surface canopy are lifted and slapped back down onto the water. This creates a rhythmic, wet applause that can be heard by sailors and kayakers in the fog. It is a sound of heavy biomass interacting with the energy of the ocean. Beneath the surface, this sound is muffled into a low-frequency churning. For the creatures of the forest, the sound of the slap indicates the weather above. A loud, chaotic slapping means a storm is brewing, signaling the fish to descend deeper into the quiet protection of the understory, while a gentle, rhythmic lapping signals calm seas and a safe time to ascend to the canopy. Deep within the fractured granite crevices of the reef, peering out with a face that only a partner could love, lives the wolf eel, Anahicthys ocellatus. Despite its name and its serpentine appearance, this creature is not a true eel, but a wolf fish, a specialized bottom dweller that has elongated over millions of years to fit into the narrow caves of the Pacific coast. The face of an adult wolf eel is a landscape of wrinkled, grey, leathery skin, often scarred from a lifetime of crushing hard-shelled prey. Its jaw is a biological hydraulic press, armed with strong canine teeth in the front for grabbing and massive, flat molars in the back for crushing. These jaws are powerful enough to pulverize the spines of a sea urchin or shatter the shell of a rock crab instantly. Yet, despite their monstrous appearance, wolf eels are gentle, homebody creatures. They mate for life, finding a partner and sharing a single cave for years. When a diver peers into a dark hole, they will often see two large, craggy heads resting side by side, the male with a bulbous, lumpy forehead and the female with a smoother profile, watching the world go by with the calm demeanor of an old married couple sitting on a front porch. The parenting style of the wolf eel is an exercise in patience and co-parenting that rivals any mammal. When the female lays her eggs, she produces a mass of roughly 10,000 pinkish-orange spheres, which she carefully deposits in the safest, deepest corner of their den. But she does not leave them. Both parents take turns guarding the clutch. They will physically wrap their long, muscular bodies around the ball of eggs, insulating them from the cold current and creating a physical barrier against predators like starfish or snails. They gently massage the eggs with their bodies to keep them oxygenated and free of silt. For months, the parents will barely eat, refusing to leave the den, their lives shrinking down to the singular purpose of protecting the next generation. When the eggs finally hatch, the larvae drift away into the plankton, leaving the parents alone in their cave, to rest and recover until the cycle begins again the following year. Darting among the lower stipes of the kelp like an underwater hummingbird is the Pacific spiny lumpsucker, a fish so comically ill-suited for swimming that it has evolved a way to simply stop trying. This tiny creature, often no bigger than a ping-pong ball, is almost perfectly round and covered in comical cone-shaped bony tubercles that look like armor plating on a toy tank. Because its fins are small and buzzing, it cannot fight the strong currents of the kelp forest for long. To solve this, its pelvic fins have fused and modified into a powerful suction disc located on its belly. When the surge gets too strong, or when the fish gets tired, it simply swims up to a kelp blade or a rock and engages the suction cup, anchoring itself instantly. It can stick to almost any surface, hanging upside down or sideways, watching the ocean rush by while it remains perfectly stationary. Its expression, with wide, bewildered eyes and a small, puckered mouth, adds to its charm, making it a favorite find for macro photographers who spot them clinging to the kelp like ornamental baubles. Hidden in the shadows of the reef is the Red Sea urchin, Mesocentrotus franciscanus, a creature that challenges our understanding of aging and mortality. While its smaller cousin, the purple sea urchin, is a frantic grazer, the red sea urchin is a giant, growing to the size of a dinner plate, with long, sharp spines that form a formidable phalanx of red needles. What is truly terrifying and wonderful about this animal is its lifespan. Scientists using radiocarbon dating, specifically analyzing the carbon-14 retained from nuclear testing in the 1950s, have discovered that red sea urchins can live to be over 200 years old. Even more remarkably, a 200-year-old urchin shows no signs of senescence. It feeds, moves, and reproduces just as vigorously as a 2-year-old. They do not get cancer, they do not get heart disease, and they do not become frail. Unless they are eaten by a sea otter or smashed by a rock, they appear to be biologically immortal, silent witnesses that were grazing on the reef before the American Civil War and are still grazing today. The sensory world of the sea urchin is a decentralized marvel, lacking a brain or eyes in the traditional sense, yet capable of seeing the entire forest. Recent research suggests that the entire body of the urchin functions as a massive, compound eye. The sea urchin has light-sensitive genes expressed at the tips of its tube feet and scattered across its skin. By using its opaque spines to shade its body from different angles, the urchin can determine the direction of light and perhaps even resolve blurry images of its surroundings. It sees with its skin, detecting the dark loom of a predator or the shadow of a kelp frond. When a shadow passes over it, the urchin reacts instantly, pointing its spines toward the disturbance in a coordinated defensive wave. It is a creature that is all-seeing without a single eye, a spherical surveillance system made of calcium and nerve nets. Lurking on the bottom, blending perfectly with the mottled granite, is the cabezon, Scorpaenichthys marmoratus, a fish that carries a toxic secret within its reproductive cycle. The cabezon is a sculpin, a large, heavy-headed fish with no scales, only a thick, wrinkled skin that matches the texture of the mossy rocks. It is a voracious predator, swallowing abalone whole and regurgitating the shells. But its true oddity lies in its flesh and eggs. The meat of the cabezon is often a vivid, neon blue or green color. This alien hue is caused by a bile pigment called biliverdin, though it disappears when the fish is cooked, turning the meat white. Its roe, however, is a different story. The eggs of the cabezon are purple and intensely poisonous to mammals and birds. A raccoon or a seabird that eats the eggs will become violently ill or die. This toxicity protects the spawn in the shallow, exposed nests where the male guards them, ensuring that while the father defends against fish, chemistry defends against everything else. The undisputed apex predator of the rocky reef's floor is the lingcod, a fish that is neither a cod nor a ling, but a greenling that has evolved into a jagged-toothed nightmare for anything smaller than itself. The lingcod is built for power, with a long, muscular body and a massive mouth filled with 500 teeth. These teeth are razor sharp and interspersed with larger fangs. But what makes the lingcod truly terrifying is the rate at which it replaces them. A study of lingcod dentition revealed that they lose and replace about 20 teeth every single day. This rapid turnover ensures that their bite is always needle-sharp, never dulled by the crushing of crab shells or the bones of prey. The lingcod is an ambush predator that will attack almost anything, including octopus, rockfish, and even smaller lingcod. The males are devoted fathers, guarding their nests of eggs with a ferocity that sees them attacking divers who get too close, biting camera lenses and fins with a fearlessness born of being the king of the bottom. When the kelp plant dies or is ripped free by the violence of a winter storm, it does not simply rot in the ocean. It begins a second life as kelp wrack on the beaches, fueling a terrestrial ecosystem that depends entirely on the sea. The massive piles of tangled brown algae that wash ashore are not garbage, they are energy deliveries. As the kelp decomposes on the sand, it is consumed by millions of beach hoppers, tiny amphipods that jump like fleas when disturbed. These hoppers are the primary food source for shorebirds like plovers and sandpipers. Without the delivery of the kelp rack, the sandy beach is a nutritional desert. The kelp forest, even in death, acts as a conveyor belt, moving the energy of the sun-drenched canopy onto the sterile land, feeding the birds of the air with the leaves of the ocean. As the sun begins to set over the kelp forest, a changing of the guard occurs, and the blacksmith fish, Chromis punctipinnis, demonstrates a behavior that is essentially a nightly communal sleepover. During the day, these small blue-grey fish form massive schools in the water column, picking plankton from the current. But as the light fades, the school descends toward the reef. They do not sleep in the open. Instead, they wedge themselves tightly into the cracks and crevices of the rocks, often tails first. They jam themselves in so deeply that they are almost impossible to extract. This behavior protects them from nocturnal predators like the electric ray and the moray eel. A diver exploring the reef at night will see thousands of tiny fishtails sticking out of every available hole, the entire population of the water column tucked into bed within the stone foundation of the forest. The painted greenling, a common resident of the kelp forest, displays a polychromatism that often confuses novice naturalists into thinking they are seeing two different species. The females and juvenile males are speckled with brown and white, blending in with the rocks and sand. The mature breeding males, however, transform into striking displays of color, often developing distinct dark bars and bright red or orange markings on their faces. This color change is a signal of status and territory. The male greenling finds a high point on a rock, a lookout tower, and perches there on his pelvic fins, watching his domain. If another male approaches, he will flare his fins and display his bright colors, engaging in a silent visual shouting match. He is the sentinel of the reef, a painted warrior guarding a patch of algae with the seriousness of a castle guard. Crawling slowly across the rocks like a prehistoric armored slug is the gumboot chiton, Cryptochiton stellari, affectionately known by tide poolers as the wandering meatloaf. This is the largest chiton in the world, growing over a foot long and weighing several pounds. Unlike most chitons, which have visible armored plates on their backs, the gumboot has completely overgrown its shell with a thick, leathery, reddish-brown skin that feels like the sole of a wet boot. It is a grazer, moving imperceptibly slowly as it rasps algae off the rocks. But its teeth are the true marvel. The radula of the gumboot chiton is capped with magnetite, a form of iron ore. These teeth are literally magnetic. They are hard enough to scrape through rock to get to the algae roots. The animal synthesizes this metal from the seawater, biomineralizing iron to build a mouth that is essentially a magnetic power tool, grinding down the reef 1 millimeter at a time. The eyes of the chiton family are among the most alien in the animal kingdom, for they are made of rock. Most animals have eyes made of protein, but chitons possess hundreds of tiny sensory structures called aesthetes embedded in their shell plates. In some species, these have evolved into true eyes with lenses made of aragonite, a transparent crystal form of calcium carbonate. This means the chiton looks at the world through lenses of stone. These rock eyes are durable and can withstand the abrasion of waves and sand, but they can also form distinct images. The chiton is a creature that has turned the very armor on its back into a visual organ, blurring the line between skeleton and sensor, watching the shadows of predators through windows made of gem-quality crystal. In the deeper muddy basins adjacent to the kelp forest lives the Pacific hagfish, a creature that has remained unchanged for 300 million years and possesses a defense mechanism that is the stuff of nightmares. The hagfish is a jawless, eel-like scavenger that feeds on dead and dying carcasses. It has no true spine, only a notochord, and its skin is loose and flabby. When a predator, such as a shark or a large fish, bites a hagfish, the hagfish reacts by releasing a microscopic amount of protein slime from glands along its side. When this protein hits the seawater, it expands instantaneously, absorbing water to become a thick, suffocating gel. A teaspoon of hagfish slime concentrate can turn a 5-gallon bucket of water into a solid block of slime in seconds. This slime clogs the gills of the predator, choking it and forcing it to spit the hagfish out to avoid suffocation. To clean the slime off its own body, the hagfish ties itself into a knot and slides the knot down its body, squeegeeing the goo away in a display of dexterity that defies its primitive anatomy. The regeneration of the kelp forest depends on a phenomenon known as recruitment windows, which are brief, critical periods of calm. The microscopic spores of the kelp are terrible swimmers. They rely on the current to carry them, but they need stillness to settle and stick to the rock. If the ocean is too turbulent, the spores are swept away into the abyss. Therefore, the future of the forest depends on lulls in the ocean's energy. A few days of calm seas in the spring can allow billions of spores to touch down and cement themselves to the reef. Once attached, they can withstand the violence that follows, but that initial moment of contact requires a peace that the ocean rarely grants. The existence of the towering forest is a testament to those rare, quiet moments when the ocean held its breath long enough for life to take hold. The bat star, Pteria miniata, is a common sight on the kelp forest floor, appearing in a riot of colors from orange to purple to mottled red. It gets its name from the webbing between its arms, which gives it a wing-like appearance. Unlike many starfish that are strictly solitary, bat stars are surprisingly social and interactive, often piling on top of one another to scavenge a dead fish. However, they also engage in slow-motion combat, known as arm wrestling. If two bat stars bump into each other while moving, they may raise their arms and push against one another, testing their strength. They do not injure each other, but the weaker star will eventually lower its arm and retreat. It is a gentle dominance display, a silent shoving match played out on the sandy arena of the seafloor. Climbing the towering stipes of the bull kelp with the agility of a spider is the northern kelp crab, Pugetia ritchii. Distinct from its shield-backed cousin, this crab has long, spindly legs armed with sharp hooks that allow it to grip the slippery surface of the algae in heavy surge. It is a vertical migrant, spending its life suspended in the water column, miles above the safety of the rocks in relative terms. Its carapace is often decorated with small pieces of red algae or hydroids, but its main defense is its tenacity. It can lock its legs onto the kelp so tightly that if you try to pull it off, the kelp will tear before the crab lets go. It rides the swaying fronds like a sailor in the rigging of a ship, weathering the storms by becoming one with the motion of the plant. The kelp forests of South Africa, California, and Australia are renowned as the shark parks of the world, particularly for the great white shark. While movies depict them as mindless eating machines, their behavior in the kelp is calculated and stealthy. Great whites use the kelp forest as a blind. They patrol the deep edges where the forest meets the open sand, using the dense stalks to hide their massive bulk from seals and sea lions resting on the surface. The vertical lines of the kelp break up the shark's silhouette, allowing a 20-foot predator to vanish into the background. They are intelligent hunters who understand the geometry of sight lines, using the architecture of the forest to stage ambushes, waiting in the dark corridors for prey to make the mistake of venturing into the open water. The concept of kelp rafting is one of the most important transport systems in the marine world, allowing flightless creatures to travel across oceans. When a large kelp plant is ripped up by a storm, its holdfast often brings rocks and small animals with it: worms, crabs, snails, and brittle stars. As the kelp raft drifts on the currents, fueled by its gas bladders, it becomes a biological ark. These rafts can travel thousands of miles, crossing deep ocean basins that would normally be impassable barriers for coastal species. Genetic studies show that populations of marine animals in South America and Antarctica are linked to those in New Zealand and Australia, connected by the great Southern Ocean currents that carry these lonely rafts of kelp. The forest is not just a destination, it is a vehicle, scattering its inhabitants across the globe on slow, golden ships. Cemented permanently to the vertical walls of the reef is the rock scallop, Crassodoma gigantea, a mollusk that begins life as a free-swimming shell, but eventually chooses a place to settle and never moves again. As a juvenile, it swims by clapping its shell, valves together, jetting through the water. But when it finds a suitable rock, it secretes a limestone cement that fuses one of its shells to the stone. It grows thick and heavy, its shell often covered in sponges and algae, until it looks like just another bump on the reef. But when it opens its shell to feed, it reveals a mantle of vivid neon orange or purple flesh. Lining the edge of this mantle are dozens of tiny, blue, bead-like eyes called ocelli. These eyes cannot form sharp images, but they are incredibly sensitive to movement and shadow. If a diver's shadow passes over the scallop, it snaps shut instantly with a cloud of silt. It is a creature that smiles with 100 blue eyes, watching the world from the safety of its stone fortress. Every summer, the water column of the kelp forest becomes the stage for the spawning dance of the kelp bass. These normally solitary and territorial fish aggregate in the thousands, forming massive, swirling pillars of fish that can reach from the bottom to the canopy. This event is synchronized with the phases of the moon. In the late afternoon, the fish become agitated, their patterns darkening. Males and females rush upward together, swimming rapidly toward the surface in a coordinated burst. At the peak of this ascent, they release their eggs and sperm into the current, where the mixing is maximized. They then dive back down to the safety of the reef. This broadcast spawning ensures that the fertilized eggs are swept away from the reef predators and out into the plankton soup of the open ocean, spreading the next generation far and wide before they settle back down to claim their own patch of the golden forest. Deep within the swaying branches of the hydroids that grow upon the kelp fronds lives a creature so alien in appearance that it seems to belong to another dimension. The skeleton shrimp, or caprellid. These are tiny crustaceans, barely an inch long, that have stripped the concept of a body down to the absolute bare essentials. They look like stick figures made of transparent glass, with long, spindly legs and a segmented body that vanishes against the background of the water. They move with a distinctive looping gait, bowing and straightening like an inchworm measuring the leaf it walks on. Their front legs are equipped with terrifyingly sharp, hooked claws, reminiscent of a praying mantis, which they keep folded against their chest in a posture of permanent prayer. They wait motionless in the current, invisible to the naked eye, until a microscopic copepod or larva drifts by. In a blur of motion too fast to track, they snap their claws forward, snatching the prey from the water column. They are the ghosts of the microcosm, skeletal hunters that infest the forest canopy in the millions, engaging in a silent, violent war on a scale so small it goes unnoticed by the fish swimming just inches away. Lying in wait on the sandy flats that border the kelp forest is the Pacific angel shark, Squatina californica, a predator that has flattened itself into a living rug. Unlike most sharks that have cylindrical bodies for cruising through open water, the angel shark has evolved wide, wing-like pectoral fins and a body so flat it is nearly two-dimensional. It buries itself in the sand, shuffling its fins until only its eyes and the top of its head are visible. Its skin is a mottled pattern of beige, grey, and black speckles, perfectly mimicking the texture of the coarse granite sand. It can lie there for days without moving, breathing through spiracles, holes behind its eyes that pump oxygenated water to its gills so it does not have to open its mouth and inhale sand. When a fish swims over its hidden head, the angel shark explodes upward. Its jaws are loosely hinged and can shoot forward to grab prey in a fraction of a second. The attack is a cloud of sand and teeth, a sudden geological upheaval that swallows the prey before settling back into the perfect stillness of the seafloor. The production of oxygen in a healthy kelp forest is so intense that on calm, sunny days, the forest actually fizzes. This is the sound of photosynthesis happening at an industrial scale. As the sun beats down on the golden canopy, the kelp cells work furiously to convert sunlight into sugar, releasing oxygen as a waste product. The water becomes supersaturated with the gas, meaning it can hold no more dissolved oxygen. When this happens, tiny bubbles of pure oxygen begin to form on the surface of the blades. These pearlescent beads grow until their buoyancy overcomes their adhesion to the leaf, and they release, floating toward the surface. Millions of these tiny bubbles rising at once create a faint, effervescent hissing sound, like a glass of champagne. It is the audible signature of the forest breathing, a reminder that these underwater trees are responsible for pumping tons of life-giving gas into the ocean and the atmosphere every single hour. Occupying the most violent real estate in the ocean is the sea palm, Postelsia palmiformes. This algae looks exactly like a miniature palm tree, standing about 2 feet tall with a thick, rubbery trunk and a crown of drooping green fronds. But unlike the giant kelp that lives in deeper, safer water, the sea palm grows exclusively in the intertidal crash zone, where the waves smash against the rocks with enough force to crush a car. To survive this, the sea palm has evolved a stipe that is incredibly flexible and tough. When a wave hits, the entire tree bends over a full 90 degrees, flattening itself against the rock until the water passes, then instantly springing back upright. Its holdfast is a dense, fused cone of tissue that grips the rock with stronger adhesion than any superglue. It must live here because it requires the massive levels of oxygen and nutrients delivered by the white water froth. It is a surfer's tree, living for the crash, standing tall and dripping in the brief moments when the tide pulls back to reveal its rocky home. Deeper down, past the limits of the giant kelp, grows the elk kelp, Pelagophycus pora, the monarch of the twilight zone. This species prefers the cold, dark water between 60 and 100 feet deep. Unlike the giant kelp, which relies on hundreds of small floats, the elk kelp invests everything in one colossal pneumatocyst, a gas bladder the size of a basketball or larger. From the top of this single massive float, two stiff, antler-like branches extend, holding broad, flat blades that can reach 10 yards in length. These blades drape down like heavy velvet curtains, catching the dim light that filters through the canopy above. The elk kelp stands alone or in small groves, looking like a stag standing in a meadow. Its single anchor line is so strong that when it eventually breaks loose and drifts to shore, people often mistake the dried, hollow float and antlers for a bullwhip or a strange musical instrument, a relic from the deep woods of the ocean. The kelp forest acts as a chemical shield against one of the greatest threats to the modern ocean: acidification. As the ocean absorbs excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the water becomes more acidic, which dissolves the calcium carbonate shells of snails, urchins, and clams. However, inside the kelp forest, the chemistry is different. Because the kelp is absorbing so much carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, it locally raises the pH of the water, making it less acidic. This creates a halo of health around the kelp bed. Shellfish living inside the forest have thicker, stronger shells than those living outside. The kelp is actively terraforming its local environment, creating a chemical refuge where the basic building blocks of life, the shells and skeletons, can still form properly despite the changing chemistry of the global sea. Hiding in the spines of the very sea urchins that threaten the forest is a tiny, vibrant ally known as the blue-banded goby. This fish is scarcely an inch long, decorated with electric blue vertical stripes on a bright red body. It is immune to the urchin's defenses and uses the spine-covered body of the urchin as a fortress. It hovers among the needles, darting out to grab microscopic plankton. In return for this protection, the goby acts as a cleaner. It eats parasites that try to attach to the urchin and picks away debris that gets stuck between the spines. This relationship is a complex truce. The goby lives inside the armor of the enemy, finding safety in a forest of spears, proving that in the crowded ecosystem of the reef, even a destroyer like the urchin can be a home to something beautiful. The California halibut begins its life looking like a normal fish, with one eye on each side of its head, swimming upright near the surface. But as it matures, it undergoes a Picasso-esque transformation. One eye physically migrates across the top of its skull to join the other eye, twisting the skull bones as it moves. Once both eyes are on the same side, the fish settles onto the bottom, lying on its blind side forever. It becomes a flatfish, perfectly adapted to the two-dimensional world of the sand. Its skin contains chromatophores that allow it to change color and texture to match the grain of the sand instantly. It can create patterns of pebbles and silt on its own back. It lies at the edge of the kelp forest, a living trapdoor, waiting for a sardine to pass overhead before launching itself into the water column with a powerful flick of its tail. Patrolling the sea floor like a velvet-robed assassin is the Navanax, Navanax inermis. This is a predatory sea slug, but it lacks the heavy shell of a snail. Instead, it relies on speed, relative to a slug, and sensory tracking. Its body is striped with brown, yellow, and blue, resembling a colorful cigar. It follows the slime trails left by other sea slugs and snails. Using chemical receptors on its head, it tracks the slime like a bloodhound, When it catches up to another slug, even one of its own species, it does not bite. It expands its buccal mass and sucks the victim in whole like a vacuum cleaner. It is a cannibalistic hunter of the slow lane, a creature that proves that even in the world of mollusks, there are wolves and there are sheep. Drifting through the kelp forest on the currents are chains of salps, gelatinous creatures that look like jellyfish, but are actually complex chordates more closely related to humans. Salps have a barrel-shaped body and move by jet propulsion, pumping water through their hollow centers. They often link together to form long, spiraling chains that can be 30 feet long, drifting like crystal snakes through the amber water. They are voracious filter feeders, straining the water for phytoplankton. Their efficiency is so high that a swarm of salps can clear the water of turbidity, making it crystal clear. By cleaning the water, they allow more sunlight to reach the kelp fronds below, inadvertently helping the forest grow. When the chain breaks or dies, it sinks rapidly, transporting tons of carbon to the deep sea, a gelatinous express train of nutrients falling into the abyss. On the sandy beaches adjacent to the kelp forests, a lunar ritual takes place known as the grunion run. The grunion is a small silverfish that lives in the kelp beds but spawns on land. On the nights of the full and new moons, during the highest tides, thousands of these fish ride the waves onto the beach. The female digs her tail into the wet sand and buries herself up to her pectoral fins to lay her eggs. The male wraps around her to fertilize them. They must time this perfectly with the waves. If they strand too high, they die. Too low, and the eggs wash away. The eggs incubate in the warm sand for 2 weeks, safe from aquatic predators. When the next high tide arrives, the agitation of the waves triggers the eggs to hatch instantly, and the tiny fry are washed back into the protection of the kelp forest to begin their lives. The giant green anemone, Anthopleura xanthogrammica, sits in the tide pools and shallow reefs like a vibrant emerald flower. Its brilliant green color comes not just from its own pigment, but from a symbiotic algae called zoochlorella that lives inside its tissues. This is a solar-powered animal. The algae use the sunlight hitting the anemone's tentacles to produce sugar, which they share with their host. In return, the anemone provides protection and exposure to the sun. If you find a giant green anemone living in a dark cave, it will be pale white because the algae cannot survive without light. It is a creature that farms its own food within its own skin, turning its body into a greenhouse to survive the lean times when drift food is scarce. Cruising through the kelp forest in wolf packs is the Pacific spiny dogfish, a small, sleek shark with a dangerous secret. In front of each dorsal fin stands a sharp, venomous spine. Unlike the venom of the scorpion fish, which is purely defensive, the dogfish uses its spines in social interactions and defense against larger sharks. These sharks are nomadic, traveling in schools that can number in the thousands. They are the scavengers and opportunists of the coast. When a school passes through the kelp, they move like a grey river, investigating every crack and crevice. They have been known to live for up to 100 years, growing slowly in the cold water. Their presence is a reminder that the shark family is not just composed of solitary giants, but of social, long-lived communities that move through the ocean like flocks of underwater birds. The mola mola, or ocean sunfish, is the strangest visitor to the kelp forest. Looking like a giant, floating head with no tail, this fish can weigh over 2,000 pounds. It is the heaviest bony fish in the world. It wanders in from the open ocean for a specific purpose, a spa day. The mola mola is often infested with parasites. It swims awkwardly to the edge of the kelp forest and turns on its side, signaling the local cleaner fish. Schools of half-moon and senorita fish rush out from the kelp to pick the parasites off its leathery skin. Sometimes, the molar will even breach the surface, allowing seagulls to land on it and peck off the bugs. It is a clumsy, gentle giant that relies on the services of the kelp community to stay healthy, a meeting place between the pelagic wanderers and the reef residents. Hiding on the bottom is the California sea cucumber, a creature that looks like an oversized, warty pickle. It spends its life crawling across the sediment, vacuuming up sand and digesting the organic detritus, pooping out clean sand behind it. It is the earthworm of the ocean, constantly tilling and cleaning the floor. But its defense mechanism is shocking. When attacked, it can violently contract its muscles and expel its internal organs, its intestines and respiratory trees, out of its anus. This sticky, toxic mess entangles the predator, allowing the cucumber to escape. Remarkably, the sea cucumber does not die. It simply crawls away and regenerates a new set of organs over the next few weeks. It is a survival strategy of ultimate sacrifice, giving up its insides to save its skin. The keyhole limpet is a mollusk that has evolved a chemical defense so potent it can repel the fiercest starfish. Most limpets clamp down on the rock when threatened, but the keyhole limpet has a shell that is too small for its body. Its black, velvety mantle covers almost the entire shell. When a predator touches it, the mantle extends and releases a slippery, acidic mucus. It also possesses a chemical shield that prevents the tube feet of starfish from gripping it. If a starfish tries to grab a keyhole limpet, it often recoils as if burned. This allows the limpet to graze openly on the rocks without fear, protected not by armor, but by the unpalatable nature of its own skin. The eating machine of the sea urchin is called Aristotle's lantern, named after the Greek philosopher who first described its shape. It is a complex structure of 5 calcium carbonate teeth, arranged in a circle, powered by an intricate system of muscles and ligaments. These teeth are self-sharpening. As the urchin gnaws on the rock and kelp, the stone wears away the soft outer layer of the tooth, exposing the hard crystalline core, keeping the edge razor sharp. The jaws are powerful enough to bore holes into steel pilings or excavate cup-shaped depressions into the solid granite reef. The urchin can extend this lantern out of its mouth to grab drift kelp or retract it to grind on the substrate, a biological drill that turns the slow-moving urchin into a geological force. The resilience of the kelp forest lies in its microscopic seed bank. The spores released by the kelp do not always germinate immediately. If the conditions are dark or the water is too warm, they can enter a state of dormancy on the seafloor. They can wait in the sediment for months, a sleeping forest of microscopic potential. This ensures that even if a catastrophic storm or a heat wave wipes out every adult kelp plant for miles, the forest is not gone. It is merely waiting. As soon as cold, nutrient-rich water returns and the light hits the bottom, the dormant gametophytes wake up, fertilize, and send a new generation of golden towers racing toward the sun. The blue shark is a pelagic wanderer that occasionally glides through the outer edges of the kelp forest. These sharks are indigo blue on top and brilliant white on the belly, a counter shading that makes them invisible in the deep open water. Their pectoral fins are long and slender, like the wings of a glider. They are energy-efficient cruisers, using the lift of the currents to travel across entire ocean basins. When they visit the kelp, they are often looking for squid that spawn in the shadows of the forest. They move with a fluid, sinuous grace, their large black eyes scanning the gloom. They are visitors from the endless blue, touching the edge of the green world before turning back to the void. And finally, we must recognize the kelp forest for what it truly is: a global connector. The same species of kelp that grows in California is found in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and South America. These forests form a golden ring around the bottom of the world, connected by the cold currents of the Southern Ocean. They are the lungs of the coast, the nursery of the fish, and the buffer against the storms. In the quiet sway of the fronds, we find a peace that is both ancient and ever-renewing. The light filters down, the fish drift in the shadows, and the ocean breathes in a slow, rhythmic cycle that has continued for millions of years. If you have enjoyed this drift through the amber cathedral of the sea, I invite you to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It helps this little submarine of curiosity find its way to other sleepy travelers. But for now, let the current hold you. Let the golden light fade into a comfortable dark. You are safe. You are drifting. Good night.